What's going on, everybody? I've been extremely busy here lately. I'm sorry I haven't been able to get as many videos out as I want for you guys. Had a lot of vacation time last month, and since I've been back, I've just been trying to get caught back up. I've had a lot of stuff piled up since I've been gone, but got an interesting little Jeep here, and I want to do a video on this one because it is kind of a perfect example of what I heard on the Automotive Diagnostic podcast. If you don't know what that is and you're an automotive tech watching my channel, you should definitely check it out. I'll leave a link to it down in the description. The particular episode that made me think of on this Jeep is called Replace with Known Good Part. And it's one of those things where sometimes you hit a roadblock in your diagnostic process of where you can be like, well, it's either this part or it's this part. And you really can't think of a way to determine which part is the bad part. And this Jeep is kind of a perfect example of that. So I put a known good part on it, and the Jeep is still broken. So with all that said, let's get into this thing, see what's going on with this Jeep, and what's actually wrong with it. Alright, so what we have is a 2013 Jeep Wrangler, 3.6, super common. I get a lot of Jeeps. I've got two more sitting down there that I've got to look at. And the problem with this Jeep, when I got it, it had pretty much every throttle body code set that it can set. I'd have to look back, but I bet it probably had 9 different throttle body codes. I could be wrong. I don't remember the exact number, but it's pretty much every one that I think it could set was set. So I pretty much wanted to know what was happening to the signals when this happened. So I did set up the picoscope, and using all 4 channels. Let me get this started over here. Start. So channel 1 is our 5 volt going to the throttle body. Channel 2 is the reference ground going to the throttle body. And then channel 3 is TP1 and channel 4 is TP2. And on Scan Tool, when I was driving this thing and it acted up, the first codes that kind of come back is these right here. P0221, throttle position sensor 2 circuit performance, and then P2135, throttle position sensors 1 and 2 correlation, meaning they are not mirroring each other like they should. They don't correlate. So that's the first codes that's set back. I'm assuming that once you drive it more and get it act up more, all the other codes probably kind of start stacking back in there as well. So what we got here on the Scan Tool is the voltages for the 2 TP sensors. And right now, just driving, you can see they are perfect mirror images, aside from the voltage scaling of the graph being a little wrong. It's not the same scale for both voltages. We've got perfect mirror images of each other. and they are doing exactly how they should. So let's give it a little full throttle. Let's see. We got those scales fixed. So you see how when the voltage scales are the same, they basically mirror each other. This is correct. This is what we want to see. So hopefully here in just a minute, this will get up hot enough to where it's going to start acting up, and bring you guys back along to see what it's doing. I had to drive it a while. I've been driving probably 30 minutes and got back to the shop, and it is acting up. It did for a few seconds there. So what you're seeing here on the scan tool is the TP2 voltage dropping out. You can see we're sitting at idle and TP2 drops out almost to 0 volts. Hopefully I stopped the scope in time to see these. So let's see. Okay, yes, we've got it in the scope capture. So I'm going to turn on the filter so it cleans all that noise up and you can better see what's going on. Okay, give that just a second to clean up. Alright, so let's zoom in on this section here. Poor old computer's lagging a little bit. But as you can see, our voltage is dropping out down to pretty low. What do we got here? About a volt. Some of it down to half a volt. So this is the fault. And while you're driving, as long as you're driving, it doesn't do it too bad like as you're driving. It will every now and then. Most of the time it's sitting here at idle, it does this. So what do you think's wrong with this? It could be bad TP sensor, bad ECM, bad wire, you know, something like corrosion in a harness or something like that. But it's so intermittent that I feel like that rules out corrosion. Ironically, it started raining on me, so I can't really get out under the hood now. But I want to really deep dive into what I've got here, the capture, and kind of go over what I think's happening. Okay, so let's deep dive into this capture a little bit and see what kind of conclusions we can come up with. So we know 5 volts is our blue, ground is red. This green trace is TP1 and the gold trace is TP2. So you can see everything 5 volt ground and TP1 is all good straight lined because we're sitting at idle, but our TP2 is dropping out, and even with the filter applied, there's a lot of noise kind of going on up in here. So it's pretty noisy. What we need to do is understand the circuit a little bit. So on all data, we've got TP1, TP2, the ECT motor, and 5 volts in signal return, all coming from the ECM to the throttle body. This is the OEM diagram, so there is no connectors involved here. The 5 volt does show it has a splice in it at some point, but that doesn't matter because we see on the scope we've got good 5 volts, we've got good ground, our TP1 is good, but we don't really know what the throttle body is supposed to be doing and what the ECM is supplying or looking for. So we kind of got to understand what the ECM's job is to know what the throttle body is supposed to be doing to make the ECM happy. What I mean by that is TP1 and TP2, they could be pull up or pull down circuit designs. If you don't know what a pull up and pull down circuit is, a pull up is basically the ECM is resting at ground and it is looking for a sensor to pull voltage up off of ground. And a pull down is the opposite of that. It is supplying a reference voltage, generally 5 volts. Some rare instances is different than that, but most everything is 5 volts and is looking for that sensor to pull that voltage down to ground. So that's how they come up with pull up. Is basically pulling it up off of ground, and pull down is pulling it to ground. So we need to know what these are, and that's going to kind of help determine what is what. And the easiest way to do that is if you just take your scan tool. Let me start this. So on the scan tool, you can see right now we're at idle, sitting at 5800 or 58 millivolts or 580 millivolts. Can't talk. And then 4400 millivolts, so 4.4 volts or half a volt basically. So I'm just going to take and turn the key off, turn the key back on, and you can see the throttle body moved, and we're just going to let it sit there. This is its rest state, wherever the spring holds the throttle blade. This is where we're at. So let's get out here and show you how we're going to know if these are pull up or pull down. Luckily it didn't rain very long. So get this hood open. So with our scan tool, we've got the voltages here. Remember, TP1, TP2, and all we got to do is unplug the throttle body and see what happens to the voltage the ECM sees. Okay, so with that unplugged, you can see that our TP2 dropped to basically 30 millivolts and TP1 is basically 5 volts. So TP1 is a pull down and TP2 is a pull up. So the throttle body is responsible for pulling TP2 up and pulling TP1 down. So what can you determine from that? Well, the throttle body, when it plugged up, that voltage goes up. Let me see if I can get this plugged back up real fast. Okay, so you see we got it plugged back up, our voltages went back. So the throttle body is pulling TP1 up. So that means the higher the resistance goes, the closer to ground that is actually going to get. So you can kind of think that if our resistance goes up, the voltage is going to drop, and quite opposite of that is going to happen on TP1. When the resistance goes up, it's going to increase in voltage. So that's kind of how this is going to be working. Resistance goes up, these numbers are going to go closer to what ECM supplies. So let's get back in here and look at this waveform. As you can see, like in this section right here, the voltage is going closer to ground. So we have an increase in resistance. You think. That's what it looks like. The way this is all hashy and real noisy and real square wavy is kind of not what you would think would be happening with resistance. Resistance you would think would be more sloped or curved. This is almost like on and off. Okay. There is some resistance to ground. That's why the bottom of it is not flat and real wavy, I guess you'd say. But we've got essentially an on and off because of how straight lined and how fast this is going high resistance back up. Or not high resistance, but dropping voltage and then back up. So it's one of those things that's like, what do we call here? Is this a bad module? Is it a bad throttle body? Not really looking like a wire, because if this wire was like shorted to ground, we'd think this would get very close to ground and the bottom of it would be a little more flattened off instead of being real wavy still down there. So I'm kind of at a crossroads with this thing. When I first got this thing acting up yesterday and I seen this, my gut feeling was that's a bad ECM. But when I unplugged the throttle body and seen that the circuit itself is a pull up, that kind of changed a little bit with me. Knowing that it's a pull up kind of changed it, because this could be increased in resistance. So it being pretty pattern like that, it would do it most often at idle. It really made me think, well, maybe it is just a bad spot in the potentiometer causing this. And it's kind of where I went with it. Like, it being that it doesn't go completely to ground means that it still had some resistance there. So if it's got a spot that's bad in the potentiometer, it could still have some resistance there, and we're just kind of getting in a spot that it doesn't like, and it's like, oh, resistance, like, and then that voltage drops. Because like I said, the throttle body holds it up in voltage with low resistance to 5 volts. Okay, so as you increase the resistance, that voltage is going to drop. So it's one of those situations where my gut is like, those straight lines look like an ECM, but the way the throttle body works, this could be a bad potentiometer. So that's where I went with it. I was like, one of two things. What's the more logical? I kind of went with throttle body. It just seemed like it fit a little bit better. So put a throttle body on here. Didn't fix it. I was skeptical of the throttle body being the issue though, because once I got the old throttle body off, I realized that throttle body wasn't very old. It was very clean, almost perfectly clean inside of it. but also there's a date code of I think it's October 20th, 2019, I think. I don't know, I'd have to look again, but there's a date code of when it was built in 2019. So it's like, is the throttle body bad? That kind of made me think probably not, but still, you got to make a choice. Do you put an ECM in it? Or do you put a throttle body on it? Which one's going to be easier to return if it's wrong? Well, if you got a good rapport with your parts person, the throttle body is going to be much easier to return than an ECM. Also, if you've got other vehicles around that have a good throttle body on it, what's going to be easier to swap? The throttle body or the ECM? It's going to be the throttle body. That's going to be the easier one to put on and go either, yep, that fixed my problem after thoroughly test driving. I mean, with this instance, like, I drove this thing this morning at least 30 minutes before this thing acted up again. It takes a lot to get this thing to act up, so you've got to drive it a lot after you put a part on it to confirm it. So that's what I did yesterday. I put a throttle body on this thing and drove it, and I still had the same issue. So guess what? We've got a bad ECM in this thing. But the thing is with this Jeep is, could you have diagnosed this thing correctly the first time with the correct part? And I believe this is one of those cases where no, I don't think you can. I think this is one of those instances where you have two possible options and you've got to make a choice. Do you go with the easier one or the one that you feel like is the problem? Because right when I first saw this, I was like, man, this looks like a bad ECM. And if you remember the Ford F-150 with the fuel pump circuit, it kind of looked similar to this. Like, the circuit kind of works a little differently, but it reminded me of that truck. So my gut was like, man, this looks like an ECM problem, but logically it could be a throttle body. So put a throttle body on it, and verifying showed that it is not the throttle body. So that's all I got for you today. I hope you kind of enjoyed this. Like I said, it's a little different. I've got a spare ECM in here that I'm going to put on this Jeep, and we'll get this thing fixed up and back to the customer. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hope you learned a little bit. And sometimes, yep, you've got to just put a known good part on something to know whether or not that's the bad part that you're replacing or is another part that you can't really determine, because this is a short inside the ECM causing this, and it only happens when it gets really hot, really saturated with heat, and it's a tricky one. This one is tricky. Guarantee almost everybody will put a throttle body on this and it will return because it's an ECM fault, but it kind of presents itself as it could be a throttle body concern. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you guys later.